My name is Yvonne. I am 68 years old and my occupation is retired, head of nursing. Every time my son looked me in the eye and told me he loved me, I knew exactly how much that affection was going to cost. He thought he was bleeding my retirement funds dry day by day, while I played the foolish, generous mother who could not say no. But what he did not know was that behind my tired eyes and accommodating smile, I was quietly orchestrating an irreversible master plan to guarantee my entire legacy would go to his ex-wife. I sat at my kitchen table, the morning sun streaming through the window, as my son Terence wrapped his arms around my shoulders in a tight squeeze. "I love you, Ma," he said, his voice dripping with that rehearsed sweetness he reserved only for moments like this. I patted his hand gently, knowing that this particular display of affection came with a precise price tag of $5,000. I had spent 30 years walking the sterile halls of the hospital, working grueling double shifts to ensure he never went without. I paid for his top university in cash so he would graduate debt-free. Now he saw my life savings as his personal piggy bank. I reached for my checkbook, sliding my pen across the paper with the shaky, hesitant handwriting of an aging woman. I played my part perfectly. I was the enabling mother, the naive widow who lived to spoil her only child. As I handed him the slip of paper, I watched his posture shift. The fake warmth evaporated, replaced instantly by a greedy gleam in his eyes the second the ink hit the paper. He barely offered a second glance around the modest brick home I had meticulously maintained for decades. All that mattered to him was the cash in his hand. "You are a lifesaver, Ma." He tossed over his shoulder as he headed for the front door, already checking his phone. I stood by the window and watched him climb into his leased luxury SUV, a flashy vehicle he could not actually afford, funded entirely by my supposed ignorance. As soon as his car turned the corner and disappeared down the street, my fragile, compliant smile vanished. I stood a little taller, my shoulders rolling back as the weight of my daily performance lifted. Terence honestly believed I was just a senile old woman, easily manipulated by a few hollow words of praise. He thought his financial abuse was a secret, a clever game he was winning while I slowly faded into the background. But I saw every lie, every hidden motive, every manipulative scheme he was brewing. For months, I had been watching him dig his own grave, while I quietly laid the groundwork for an inescapable trap. Terence was completely unaware that every dollar I handed him was just bait keeping him distracted, while I prepared to transfer my entire generational wealth to Camille, the one woman he had thrown away and despised. 20 years ago, the world as I knew it stopped spinning when my husband David passed away. I was left completely alone to raise our teenage son, Terence. I folded my grief away into a small box in my heart and put on my nursing scrubs because I had a boy who needed a bright future. For 2 decades, I worked grueling double shifts at the city hospital. I missed holidays, family gatherings, and quiet Sunday mornings, willingly trading my own comfort for overtime pay. Every aching joint in my legs and every single sleepless night was a deliberate sacrifice, so Terence would never know the harsh reality of struggling to survive. My absolute devotion to him was my compass in life. I paid for his entire education at a prestigious university in cash. I wanted him to walk across that graduation stage completely debt-free and ready to conquer the world without any burdens weighing him down. I poured unconditional love and absolute blind trust into my only child, believing with all my heart that my sacrifice would mold him into a humble and honorable man. He was the center of my universe, and the sole reason I pushed through the exhaustion every single day. I thought the bond we shared was unbreakable and sacred. I truly believed that by giving him the world, he would learn to deeply cherish the tired hands that built it for him. I never imagined that shielding him from every hardship would ultimately blind him to the value of hard work and turn his heart so completely cold. For a while it seemed my prayers had been answered when Terence married Camille. Camille is a beautiful, hard-working black woman with a spirit as warm as the summer sun. She treated me with genuine respect and truly loved Terence for who he was, not what he could provide. She brought the greatest joy into my life when she gave birth to my grandson, Jordan. That sweet boy is 8 years old now, and he is the absolute light of my days. Camille was the kind of daughter-in-law a mother prays for, grounded, loyal, and fiercely dedicated to creating a loving home. But as Terence climbed the corporate ladder, earning larger paychecks and mingling with a different crowd, a toxic arrogance began to infect his soul. He started acting as if the modest life Camille valued was beneath him. He would mock her simple joys and complain that she was not ambitious enough to match his new, elevated status. My heart broke watching my son discard a woman made of pure gold simply because she did not fit into his superficial new world. He coldly filed for divorce, tearing his family apart without a second thought. Terence left Camille to struggle as a single mother, fighting tooth and nail to provide for Jordan, while he paraded around the city, acting like a man who had finally shed dead weight. I watched Camille work late hours, just to keep food on the table for my grandson, while my own son offered nothing but the bare legal minimum for child support. It did not take long for Terence to replace Camille with someone who matched his newly inflated ego. Enter Chloe, his second wife. Chloe is a woman completely consumed by empty materialism, parading around with designer handbags that cost more than my first car, and wearing a permanent expression of distaste whenever she steps foot into my neighborhood. Along with Chloe came her brother Brad. Brad is an incredibly smooth-talking white American who wears sharp, tailored suits and loudly introduces himself at every single opportunity as a senior wealth management consultant. From the moment they pushed their way into my life, they brought an unbearable, suffocating air of entitlement. Chloe and Brad constantly belittle my modest old-school lifestyle. They openly roll their eyes at my traditional ways, scoffing at my vintage furniture, my floral curtains, and the homemade meals I prepare. Chloe loves to make snide remarks about my unassuming brick house, loudly suggesting to Terence that I should sell it so I can afford a lifestyle more suited to the 21st century. Brad constantly corners me with unsolicited advice, flashing his fake smile, while telling me I need him to urgently rescue my meager finances from my outdated checking accounts. They both treat me exactly like a pitiable, ignorant old woman who barely has pennies to rub together. But their blinding arrogance is their greatest flaw. They are completely and entirely unaware that my modest brick home has been fully paid off for over 15 years. They have absolutely no idea that underneath my discount store clothing and my quiet, simple habits, I am sitting on a $2.5 million nest egg. Between the life insurance policy my late husband left behind and decades of my own frugal, brilliant investments, I had quietly amassed a massive fortune. I never flaunted my wealth because I desperately wanted Terence to value family and character over finances. So I sit back and listen to Chloe complain about the smell of my collard greens, and I calmly watch Brad patronize me about managing a fixed income. They look at me and see a naive, impoverished target ripe for exploitation. They do not realize that the unassuming retired nurse they constantly mock holds more financial power in one single bank account than their entire flashy, debt-ridden existence combined. The Sunday dinners at my house used to be filled with the sound of Jordan laughing and Camille complimenting my cooking. Now they were a battlefield disguised as family gatherings. I dreaded the weekends knowing I would have to endure their presence just to maintain the illusion of a happy family. Chloe would walk through my front door, her nose scrunched up as if she had just stepped into a landfill. She would drop her designer handbag on my antique console table and sigh loudly, complaining about what she called the old smell of my house. She claimed it smelled like mothballs and stale grease, entirely ignoring the hours I spent cleaning and roasting a chicken just for them. She would look me up and down, her eyes lingering on the simple slacks and comfortable sweaters I bought on clearance at the local department store. She once had the nerve to tell me that a woman of my age should invest in better fabrics, so I would not look like a charity case. She said it with a fake smile, pretending it was helpful advice rather than a direct insult. I bit my tongue, serving her a plate of food my hard-earned money had bought. Then there was Brad. He attended these dinners, uninvited, acting as if my dining room was his personal boardroom. He would lean back in his chair, swirling his wine glass, and speak to me with a tone usually reserved for a toddler. He constantly brought up my finances, offering to rescue my money from my outdated checking accounts. He said a woman like me simply did not have the financial literacy to navigate the modern economy. He promised to help me set up a portfolio that would stop me from burning through my meager savings. I watched this smug white man wearing a suit that cost more than my first mortgage payment confidently explain wealth to a black woman who had single-handedly built a multi-million-dollar legacy. It took every ounce of self-control not to laugh in his face. I simply nodded, thanking him for his unwarranted concern. But the worst part was not Chloe or Brad. It was Terence. My own flesh and blood sat there chewing his food in silence, never once defending his mother. Instead of telling his wife and brother-in-law to show some respect, he used their insults to manipulate me. When the dishes were cleared, he would pull me aside into the kitchen wearing a pitiful expression. He would tell me how hard things were, how Chloe was stressed about their image, and how he just needed a temporary loan to keep up appearances at his new firm. He played on my guilt, reminding me of how hard we struggled when his father died, claiming he just needed a little help to keep his head above water. He knew I could never bear to see him struggle, and he weaponized that maternal instinct with ruthless efficiency. He squeezed thousands of dollars out of me to fund their unsustainable, flashy lifestyle, leaving with a fat check and a hollow promise to pay me back. I watched him drive away week after week, knowing he was selling his soul to impress people who had no real value. I let them believe they were breaking me down, letting their disrespect slide off my back because I needed them to feel completely comfortable in their arrogance. The true turning point arrived during a blistering afternoon in late July. I had invited them over for a summer barbecue, a tradition I maintained just to keep my enemies exactly where I could see them. I spent the entire morning in the kitchen, preparing potato salad, baking a peach cobbler, and marinating ribs. I wanted to try a new glaze I had found online, so I set up my iPad on a small tripod by the open window in the sunroom. I hit the record button to capture a video of myself mixing the ingredients, planning to send the clip to a few friends from my old nursing unit who were always asking for my recipes. The kitchen was hot, so I stepped away to the laundry room to grab a fresh apron, completely forgetting that the tablet was still rolling. Through the open window, the camera perfectly captured the shaded patio where Terence, Chloe, and Brad were sitting with their iced drinks. I did not realize what I had captured until much later that evening. The house was finally quiet. The dishes were washed, and the lingering scent of barbecue smoke was fading from the air. I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea, exhausted from playing the gracious host. I opened my iPad to review the cooking video, intending to edit out the part where I walked away. I watched myself mix the spices, and then I saw myself step out of the frame. But the video kept playing. The microphone on the tablet was incredibly sharp, picking up the crystal-clear audio of the patio outside. I was about to reach out and stop the recording when I heard my own name. It was Chloe's voice, sharp and whining. She was complaining about how long they had to keep pretending to enjoy my company. I froze my finger hovering just above the screen. I turned the volume all the way up, holding my breath as I leaned closer to the device. What unfolded over the next few minutes was a conversation so deeply vile that it made my blood run absolutely cold. Brad spoke next, his tone slick and casual like a predator discussing his next meal. He told Chloe to be patient, assuring her that their performance was almost over. He then addressed my son, asking Terence if he was absolutely sure I had no other family members who might step in and ask questions. Terence laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound that I had never heard from the boy I raised. He told Brad that I was completely isolated, just a lonely old widow who practically worshipped the ground he walked on. He bragged about how easily he could make me sign anything if he just gave me a hug and a sad story. He actually boasted about bleeding me dry, calling his own mother an easy target. My hands began to shake as I listened to the people I had welcomed into my home plot against me. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a tight, suffocating grip that made it hard to breathe. This was not just typical greed or spoiled behavior. This was a calculated, malicious strategy to destroy my life. I watched the screen as Brad pulled a folder from his designer leather briefcase and slid it across the patio table toward my son. I could not see the exact words on the paper, but Brad's explanation painted a perfectly horrifying picture. He was laying out a blueprint to rob me blind, and my son was eagerly leaning in to review the details. I sat there in the dim light of my kitchen, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of my neck. The tea in my mug grew ice cold as I rewound the video, forcing myself to listen to their betrayal a second time, to ensure my ears were not deceiving me. They were not. Every word was a deliberate dagger aimed straight at my back, entirely confirming that the son I had sacrificed everything for was gone, replaced by a ruthless stranger. I pressed the tablet closer to my ear, unwilling to miss a single syllable of their venomous scheme. Brad tapped the folder on the patio table and confidently explained the mechanics of his trap. He had drafted a series of highly predatory contracts, disguised as standard financial wellness documents. He told Terence that hidden within the dense legal jargon was an irrevocable transfer of the deed to my home, directly into his firm's holding account. Brad chuckled, calling it a seamless acquisition. He assured my son that I would not read the fine print, because according to Terence, I trusted him blindly. But the theft of my fully paid-off home was only the beginning. Chloe chimed in, her voice dripping with malicious excitement. She asked Brad how quickly they could access the liquid cash. Brad explained the second phase of the operation. The documents also included a broad medical and financial power of attorney. Brad outlined a plan to use my recent minor forgetfulness, which was nothing more than the normal fatigue of a woman my age, to have me officially declared mentally incompetent. They laughed loudly, a horrific chorus of amusement at my expense. Brad bragged that once a doctor signed off on my supposed cognitive decline, they would have unrestricted access to immediately drain my retirement accounts and seize whatever savings I had tucked away. I sat completely paralyzed as my son, the boy I had worked double shifts to feed, nodded in agreement. But the ultimate betrayal, the dagger that truly severed the bond between us, came next. Chloe asked what they were supposed to do with me once the money was gone and the house was theirs. She whined that she absolutely refused to have me living with them, claiming I would ruin her aesthetic and drive her crazy. I waited for Terence to speak up. I waited for a sliver of humanity, a tiny fragment of the love I had poured into him for decades. Instead, Terence spoke with a coldness that shattered my heart permanently. He told his wife not to worry. He said he had already researched a state-run nursing home a few counties over. He described it as a bottom-tier facility, the kind of place where Medicaid patients are forgotten in crowded, understaffed wards. "It is cheap and far away," Terence said casually. "We can drop her off. Let the state deal with her and we will never have to visit." He actually sounded relieved at the prospect of throwing his mother away like a piece of broken furniture. The heartbreak I felt in that exact moment was absolute. It was a visceral, tearing sensation deep within my chest, as if 30 years of maternal devotion were being violently ripped out of me. I closed my eyes, letting the tears fall freely down my cheeks in the quiet sanctuary of my kitchen. I cried for the husband I had lost, who would have been devastated to see what our son had become. I cried for the countless sacrifices I had made, the exhausted nights I spent on my feet at the hospital, all for a child who was now actively plotting to erase me from existence. But as the tears dried, the devastating sorrow began to harden. The warmth in my heart froze over, replaced by a crystalline, icy clarity. I opened my eyes, staring at the paused video on the screen. They thought I was a naive, uneducated victim waiting to be slaughtered. They thought my love for Terence made me weak. They had no idea that a mother who has navigated the trenches of the medical field for decades possesses a strength they could never comprehend. I wiped my face, my grief transforming into a calculating fury. They wanted a war over my legacy. They wanted to steal the foundation I built with my own 2 hands. I calmly saved the video file, backing it up to multiple secure locations. I was done crying. I was done being the accommodating widow. Terence and his toxic family had just ignited a fire inside me, and I was going to use it to burn their entire scheme to ashes. I woke up the morning after finding that horrific video with a clarity that felt almost dangerous. I did not call Terence screaming or crying. I did not storm over to his apartment to demand answers. In my 30 years as a nurse, I had learned that the most effective way to deal with a severe creeping infection is not to panic, but to methodically isolate and destroy it. If Terence, Chloe, and Brad wanted to believe I was a fragile, declining old woman who could no longer manage her own life, I would give them a performance worthy of an Academy Award. I started small to build their false confidence. During their next Sunday visit, I deliberately left my reading glasses in the refrigerator right next to the butter. When Chloe asked for a glass of water, I poured her orange juice and handed it to her with a vacant, pleasant smile. I watched as she exchanged a quick, triumphant glance with my son, a look that silently screamed their plan was already working. I asked Terence the exact same question about his recent work project 3 times in the span of an hour. Each time he answered with exaggerated, patronizing patience, treating me exactly like the senile burden he desperately needed me to be. I watched Terence smirk when I pretended to forget the name of his current firm. It was a subtle expression, a slight lifting of the corner of his mouth that betrayed his total lack of respect for the woman who gave him life. He thought my mind was fading, slipping into the dark fog of old age, leaving my assets ripe for the picking. The hook was set, and they were swallowing the bait whole. Brad wasted absolutely no time making his move. Just a few days later, he stopped by my house unannounced, wearing a sharp, tailored suit and a predatory grin. He sat at my kitchen table, adopting a tone of deep, manufactured concern. He told me that Terence was terribly worried about my memory lapses and had asked him to step in as a personal favor to organize my confusing paperwork. I put on my best confused expression, fluttering my hands and sighing heavily about how complicated modern banking had become for someone my age. I told him I would be so incredibly grateful for a smart young man to help me sort it all out. I walked to my bedroom and retrieved a specific, carefully curated folder I had prepared just for him. I handed Brad a thick stack of statements from an old secondary checking account and a modest savings account, holding roughly $80,000. It was a substantial enough amount to keep a greedy leech interested, but it completely concealed the $2.5 million safely hidden in my primary investment portfolios and offshore high-yield accounts. When I handed Brad the fake financial portfolio, I made sure my hands shook just a little bit, mimicking the physical frailty they expected. The absolute joy radiating from Brad's face as he thumbed through the meager bank statements was almost comical. He eagerly flipped through the pages, his eyes practically glowing as his mind calculated his imaginary commission on my supposed life savings. He patted my hand with fake gentleness, promising he would draft up some simple documents to protect this money. so I would not have to stress my tired mind anymore. I smiled back at him, my heart perfectly still in my chest. He genuinely thought he had successfully manipulated a vulnerable, clueless widow. He had absolutely no idea I was expertly managing him like a clinical chart, monitoring his symptoms of greed and preparing the ultimate cure. I offered him a slice of freshly baked pound cake before he left, maintaining the facade of the sweet, grateful mother. I watched him devour it, completely oblivious to the poison of his own arrogance. With the predators temporarily distracted by the fake financial documents I had provided, I put the second most crucial phase of my plan into motion. I picked up my phone and dialed the only person who had ever truly respected our family. Camille answered on the second ring, her voice warm and genuine, a stark contrast to the hollow greetings I received from my own son. I asked if I could come over to her apartment immediately, explaining that I needed to discuss something deeply important regarding my grandson Jordan and his future. When I arrived at her modest two-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, the reality of her struggle broke my heart all over again. Camille had been working tirelessly as a medical billing specialist to provide a stable, loving home for my grandson. She was living on a strict, unrelenting budget, while my son squandered his inflated income on luxury car leases, designer bags for his new wife, and expensive dinners. We sat down at her small, scratched dining table, and I took a deep, steadying breath. Without trying to soften the blow or offer unnecessary context, I pulled out my tablet and played the video recording from the patio. I sat in silence and watched the color drain completely from Camille's face as she listened to her ex-husband calmly plot to throw his own mother into a dilapidated, state-run facility so he could steal her home. Camille did not gloat. She did not say she told me so, even though she had every right to. Instead, she reached across the table and grasped my hands, tightly sobbing for the absolute heartbreak she knew I was experiencing. She cried for me, mourning the son I had lost to irreversible greed. In that moment of shared profound grief, our bond cemented into an unbreakable alliance. I wiped my tears, closed the tablet cover with a sharp snap, and told her that we were not going to be victims in this story. I carefully explained my true financial situation, watching her eyes widen in pure shock as I revealed the $2.5 million nest egg I had kept hidden all these years. I told her I was cutting Terence off completely and placing every single asset under her control to ensure Jordan would never have to struggle the way we did. The very next morning, Camille drove me to the prestigious downtown office of Attorney Harrison. He was a seasoned, ruthless estate lawyer who specialized in impenetrable legal structures and asset protection. As Camille and I sat in his office, the gravity of the situation settled over us. I laid all my authentic documents, bank statements, property deeds, and investment portfolios onto his massive oak desk and gave him one clear, uncompromising directive. I wanted to build an absolute fortress around my wealth that my son could never breach, no matter how many fraudulent doctors or fake legal documents he tried to procure. Attorney Harrison listened to my story with professional detachment, but I could see the sharp glint of a legal shark ready to strike. He worked with astonishing speed and precision, asking detailed questions to ensure there were no loopholes Brad could exploit later. Behind Terence's back, we established a rock-solid, irrevocable trust. I legally transferred the entirety of my $2.5 million estate, my sprawling stock portfolios, and the deed to my fully paid-off brick home directly into the trust. I named Camille as the primary trustee and Jordan as the sole beneficiary. I relinquished my own ownership on paper, ensuring that if Brad or Terence tried to claim I was mentally incompetent later, it would not matter in the slightest. The assets were already legally gone, completely untouchable by any future power of attorney they might try to force upon me. I handed over the original deed to the home where I had raised my son, knowing I was severing the final tie to the boy he used to be. Camille wept silently as she signed the acceptance documents, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the financial security I was gifting her and Jordan. It was the ultimate act of maternal protection, redirected toward the only family members who truly deserved it. Signing those thick stacks of documents felt like dropping a massive physical weight from my tired shoulders. The legacy I had built through decades of blood, sweat, and grueling hospital shifts was finally secure in the hands of a woman who possessed genuine integrity. I walked out of the law office feeling invincible. With my fortunes securely locked away behind impenetrable legal walls, all that remained was to patiently let the rats walk right into the trap. The opportunity arrived perfectly on schedule just a few days later. Terence called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice dripping with that manufactured sugary affection I had grown to absolutely detest. He cheerfully announced that he, Chloe, and Brad wanted to come over for a special family dinner on Friday night. He casually mentioned that Brad had put together a simple financial wellness package for me to sign, claiming it was just a few standard forms to make sure my golden years were completely stress-free and comfortably managed. I injected pure, bubbly gratitude into my voice, telling him how incredibly blessed I was to have a son looking out for my best interests. I promised to make his absolute favorite meal a slow-roasted pot roast with candied yams, collard greens, and thick buttery cornbread. The dark irony of spending hours in my kitchen, carefully seasoning and roasting a meal to comfort the very men who were coming to slaughter my future, was not lost on me. I spent all of Friday preparing the feast, moving around my familiar kitchen, with a profound sense of inner peace. The house smelled rich, savory, and inviting, creating a perfect, flawless illusion of maternal warmth and domestic bliss. At exactly 6 o'clock, the doorbell chimed through the hallway. I opened the door to find Terence, Chloe, and Brad standing on my porch, reeking of expensive designer cologne and thinly veiled greed. Brad gripped his sleek leather briefcase, tightly treating it like a pirate guarding a treasure chest. I ushered them inside, playing the role of the delighted, bustling hostess to absolute perfection. The sheer audacity of their performance was staggering. While Chloe immediately took a seat in the living room, kicking off her heels, scrolling endlessly on her phone, and complaining loudly about the evening humidity, Brad arranged the fraudulent transfer deeds as if he were presenting me with a gift. She pointedly refused to offer any help in the kitchen, completely ignoring the effort I had put into the evening. Terence trailed behind me into the dining area, giving me a tight, restrictive hug that made my skin crawl with revulsion. The dinner itself went flawlessly. I served them generous heaping portions, smiling serenely as Brad talked over me, using big, complicated financial buzzwords to explain how he was going to streamline my complicated life. Terence nodded along aggressively, playing the part of the devoted, protective son. He poured my wine and repeatedly told me I deserved to relax and let them handle all the heavy lifting from now on. I ate my food, slowly savoring the delicious taste of impending justice. As soon as the last plates were cleared and the dessert coffee was poured, the atmosphere in the dining room noticeably shifted. The casual, loud banter vanished, replaced by a sharp, hyper-focused tension. Brad unlatched his leather briefcase with a crisp, echoing snap. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents marked with brightly colored sticky notes, indicating exactly where I needed to sign. He laid a heavy, expensive fountain pen on top of the papers and slid them across my polished wooden table. He explained in a soothing, hypnotic tone that these were just standard authorizations to consolidate my checking accounts and protect my home from heavy state taxes. Terence leaned forward, placing his warm hand over mine, his eyes locking onto my face with a sickeningly fake sincerity. His grip on my hand tightened a subtle physical pressure designed to coerce me into submission. I looked at the glossy pages of the power of attorney documents, tracing the meticulously typed paragraphs, that would strip me of my human rights and banish me to a state-funded nightmare. He told me it was time to let go of the burden, urging me in a soft whisper to just sign the papers for my own good. They sat there across from me, smiling like hungry predators who had successfully cornered their helpless prey, utterly convinced they had won the long game. I picked up the pen, feeling its cold metal casing against my fingers, and looked back at my son's expectant, greedy eyes. They had absolutely no idea they were sitting inside a house they no longer had any legal right to, waiting for a signature that meant absolutely nothing. Completely blind to the devastating ambush that was about to break their false reality into a million jagged pieces. Brad tapped the glossy documents with his perfectly manicured finger, leaning across my dining table, with the false warmth of a snake sizing up its prey. He pointed to the bottom line, his voice dipping into that sickly sweet register he reserved for people he thought were stupid. "Just sign right here, Yvonne," he murmured. Acting as if he were handing me the key to eternal peace, Terence sat to my left, placing his heavy hand over mine, completely blind to the fact that my skin crawled at his touch. "Ma, this is for your own good," Terence said, his voice laced with manufactured sympathy. "You have worked so hard your entire life, and it is time for you to just rest and let us take the wheel." Chloe did not even bother looking up from her phone, casually sipping the expensive wine I had paid for, waiting for the ink to dry so she could start spending my life savings. I held the heavy fountain pen they had provided, staring at the sharp golden nib. The silence in the dining room stretched tight thick with their greedy anticipation. They were practically holding their breaths, absolutely certain that their months of manipulation had paid off. I looked at my son, searching his face one last time for even a flicker of guilt, a single ounce of remorse for the fact that he was actively trying to ruin my life. I found nothing but cold, empty entitlement. The silence was suddenly shattered by the sharp, echoing ring of the front doorbell. Terence frowned, his hand stiffening over mine, while Brad quickly tried to pull the documents back toward his side of the table. "Are you expecting someone?" Ma Terence asked, a sudden edge of irritation bleeding through his fake, loving tone. I set the fountain pen down on the polished wood with a deliberate, echoing click. I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress, and let a genuine, chilling smile spread across my face. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady and firm. "I am expecting the only men in this city who actually know how to protect my money." I walked to the front door, leaving Terence and Brad exchanging confused, frantic glances. I pulled the door open to reveal Attorney Harrison standing tall in his immaculate dark suit, flanked by a broad-shouldered private investigator I had hired weeks ago, Mr. Sterling. They stepped into my foyer with the undeniable weight of absolute authority. I led them straight into the dining room. The moment Brad locked eyes with Attorney Harrison, all the color drained from his smug, sun-kissed face. As a man who operated in the shady corners of wealth management, Brad instantly recognized the ruthless reputation of the man standing in my home. Chloe finally dropped her phone onto the table, her jaw hanging slack as the massive private investigator moved to block the dining room exit. Terence jumped to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor, his face twisted in utter confusion. "Ma, who are these people?" he demanded. "These people," trying to puff out his chest and play the protective man of the house. "What is going on here?" Attorney Harrison did not wait for me to speak. He set his own thick black leather briefcase onto the dining table right on top of Brad's fraudulent contracts. "We are here to ensure that Mrs. Yvonne Andrews is no longer harassed, manipulated, or defrauded in her own home," Attorney Harrison declared, his voice booming with legal fury. The smug, victorious smiles that Terence and Brad had worn all evening completely vanished, replaced by the suffocating, terrifying realization that they had entirely lost control of the room. I walked back to my seat, but I did not sit down. I stood at the head of my table, dropping the fragile, confused persona I had meticulously maintained for months. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and tapped the screen. On the sideboard, my portable Bluetooth speaker chimed to life. I hit play. The clear, undeniable audio of their patio conversation flooded the dining room. Brad's voice echoed through the speakers, bragging about the seamless acquisition of my house. Then came Chloe's whining complaints about not wanting me around. But the fatal blow was the sound of Terence, my own flesh and blood, casually agreeing to dump me in a bottom-tier state-run nursing facility so he would never have to visit. The recording played loudly, exposing their profound wickedness for everyone in the room to hear. Terence stumbled backward, his face turning a sickly shade of grey, his eyes wide with absolute horror. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some pathetic excuse, but I silenced him with a single furious glare. Do not insult my intelligence by trying to lie your way out of this, I said, my voice ringing with righteous, burning anger. I heard every single word you said, Terence. I know exactly how little my lifetime of sacrifice meant to you. I turned my attention to Brad, who was visibly sweating frantically, trying to slide his documents back into his briefcase. Leave those papers exactly where they are, Brad, I commanded, stepping forward. But honestly, you could have me sign them 100 times over, and they would be completely useless. Terence looked at me, panic and confusion warring on his face. What do you mean, Ma? He stammered, his voice cracking. I looked my son dead in the eye, feeling a profound surge of vindication. I mean that you are entirely too late, Terence. I no longer own this house. I no longer own the investment accounts, the mutual funds, or the $2.5 million estate you were drooling over. I legally transferred every single cent of my generational wealth into an irrevocable trust last week. I made sure my fortune went to the only people who actually know the meaning of family respect and loyalty. You have been completely and irrevocably disinherited. Every asset, every dollar, and the very deed to the ground you are standing on now legally belongs to Camille and my grandson, Jordan. The shock that rippled through the room was palpable. Chloe let out a sharp, hysterical gasp, realizing that the glamorous, wealthy lifestyle she thought she was marrying into had just vanished into thin air. Terence grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself, his entire body shaking as the devastating truth crashed down on him. He had traded his loyal first wife, his innocent child, and his devoted mother for empty status. And his reward was absolute ruin. Complete panic descended upon the room. Attorney Harrison stepped forward, looking directly at Brad, who was shaking like a leaf. My private investigator and I have compiled a mountain of evidence regarding your predatory contracts and your conspiracy to commit financial fraud against a senior citizen, Attorney Harrison stated coldly. If you do not leave this property immediately, my next call will be to the State Licensing Board to have you permanently disbarred, followed swiftly by a call to the district attorney for criminal charges. Brad did not say a single word. He abandoned his expensive leather briefcase on the table, shoved past his sister, and practically sprinted out the front door, fleeing like the coward he truly was. Chloe erupted into a vicious, screaming tantrum. Her perfectly styled facade crumbled as she turned entirely on Terence, shoving him hard in the chest. You told me she was loaded. Chloe shrieked, her face red with absolute rage. You told me we were getting millions. I am not staying married to a broke, drowning loser with maxed-out credit cards. She grabbed her designer handbag and stormed out of the house, cursing my son with every step. Terence was left standing alone, stripped of his arrogant pride, his fake friends, and his stolen wealth. He fell to his knees on my dining room floor, crying genuine tears of despair. Ma, Please, you cannot do this to me, he begged, reaching out for my skirt. I have debts I cannot pay. I will lose everything. I looked down at the man I had raised, feeling no pity, only the cold, hard reality of justice. This is no longer my house, Terence, I said calmly, stepping away from his grasping hands. This is Camille's house now, and you are trespassing. Get out. Terence sobbed, pleading for another chance, begging for the mother he had planned to throw away just days prior. Mr. Sterling stepped forward, physically lifting my son by his arms and escorting him firmly toward the exit. I stood on the porch and watched as Terence was pushed out into the warm evening air, standing alone in the driveway with absolutely nothing. I shut the heavy front door, the click of the lock echoing through the quiet hallway, finally sealing him out of my life and securing my family's true legacy forever. 6 months have passed since that explosive night in my dining room, and the heavy, suffocating weight that used to hang over my life has completely evaporated. I am sitting on my front porch right now, the warm, late afternoon breeze wrapping around me as I sip a tall glass of cold, sweet tea. The view from this porch has never looked so incredibly beautiful. Out in the front yard, my grandson Jordan is running through the grass, laughing loudly as he chases a bright red soccer ball. Just a few feet away, Camille is kneeling by the flower beds, humming a soft, joyful tune as she tends to the blooming hydrangeas. This house is no longer a silent museum of my past sacrifices. It is a vibrant, living sanctuary filled with genuine love and mutual respect. Terence is entirely out of our lives. The last I heard, his flashy lifestyle completely collapsed. Without my secret financial lifeline, the bank repossessed his leased luxury car, and he is currently drowning in a sea of crippling debt, facing the harsh, unforgiving reality of the real world. Brad is under investigation for his predatory practices, and Chloe vanished the moment the designer bags stopped coming. Sometimes when the house is quiet, I sit back and reflect on the painful but absolutely necessary truth I had to learn. Blood does not ever excuse abuse. Just because you gave birth to a child or sacrificed your entire youth to provide for them does not mean you are obligated to let them drain your spirit and steal your future. A mother's ultimate duty is not to be a blind, suffering martyr. It is to protect her hard-earned legacy and ensure it goes only to those who genuinely value and respect it. Now, I want to ask all of you listening to my journey a very important question. Have you ever had to protect your own peace and sanity from your very own flesh and blood? What exactly would you do if the child you raised, fed, and loved tried to selfishly sell your future for their own temporary comfort? It is a devastating reality that far too many parents face in silence, but we do not have to suffer quietly anymore. I would truly love to hear your thoughts and your own experiences. If my story resonated with you today, please hit that like button to show your support, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more true life stories of strength, survival, and justice. Let me know down in the comments where you are watching from right now and what time it is there. I always read through your messages, and it brings my heart so much joy to see how far these stories travel. Thank God for second chances and newfound peace. God bless every single one of you, and please remember this vital lesson. Never mistake a mother's gentle kindness for weakness.